Good morning, everybody. Today's talk is on deciphering various OCT technologies for glaucomatous optic neuropathy. We have a great team of experts with us. We have Major General Dr. Sagarika Patia. She is SM, VSM retired and Senior Consultant at Center for Sight, New Delhi. We have Dr. Colonel Madhu Badoria. She is the Director of Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, Sitapur, UP. Dr. Mayuri Kamar, she is a glaucoma consultant, Occura Eye Care and Research Center, Ahmedabad. And Dr. Sachin Dharwadkar, who is the Director, Samartha Clinics, Mumbai, and Tejod Glaucoma Head, Mumbai. I'm Dr. Medha Prabhu Desai. I'm Director, Insight Vision Foundation from Pune. I'm from Pune, basically. So aim of the IC is to understand correlation between ONH signs of glaucomatous optic neuropathy and OCT, to understand interpretation of different OCT technologies, to know advantages and limitations of OCT, and to be able to identify different clinical scenarios. So I'll just in brief, in 5 minutes, start with my talk on relation between ONH and OCT. Glaucoma, we know it's a chronic progressive disease. There is irreversible damage to the optic nerve head, which leads to blindness. Hence, clinical evaluation of ONH is a key point in diagnosing glaucoma. And nowadays, OCT is commonly used for evaluation of this glaucomatous optic neuropathy. We should have mandatory knowledge before interpreting any OCT, and that is optic nerve head normal variation, relevant features of glaucomatous optic neuropathy, correlation with OCT, and outliers if there are any. So most important is to know how a normal optic nerve looks like. So it follows ISNT rule. Disc vertically is more than horizontal, whereas cup is horizontal more than variate. Always remember there is physiologic variation, and all high CDs may not be glaucoma. Identifying NRR is very, very important, because this is the area which is of healthy tissue in any given optic nerve head. RNFL is the crucial factor. We should differentiate how a uniform pattern looks like and how the defects look like. So this is normal, slit defects, there can be wedge defects, or diffuse loss of RNFL. We should know and well familiar with all the features of glaucomatous optic neuropathy, like notching, focal atrophy, bearing of circumlinear vessels, laminar dot sign, or bayoneting of vessel, and pallar cup discrepancy and vertical enlargement. So in glaucoma continuum, OCT helps us in identifying these diseases statistically, from asymptomatic disease to moderate and advanced glaucoma. So it's a great potential in glaucoma and effective diagnostic and disease monitoring tool. Obviously, we know that it is non-invasive, is a major technological breakthrough, and now it has become a standard protocol for glaucoma patients. So we can use this for diagnosis as well as monitoring of our progression. So there are currently many OCT devices available. We are going to talk on Cirrus OCT, Topcon OCT, RTV OCT, Spectralis, and we have to remember that each machine has a different glaucoma scan pattern, proprietary software, segmentation algorithm, and display outputs, and hence data of one machine cannot be compared with any other machine. So how do we predict this? There are certain signs on OCT, or certain things on OCT which OCT can detect, that is NRR thinning, RNFL thinning. There can be clues for physiologic variation, and we know statistical progression is available with OCT. But there are certain signs which OCT cannot detect, and these are vascular signs, pallor of cup or NRR, and peripapillary atrophy. So if patient has NRR thinning and RNFL thinning like this, OCT can definitely find out and tell us that, okay, this is NRR thinning. The most important is you can see that NRR thinning and RNFL thinning exactly in that location. So most important after this also is documentation, drawing of OCT and ONH, and also visual field findings. So this can be done. So OCT will help us in identifying many conditions like preperimetric, early glaucoma, moderate glaucoma, and even advanced glaucoma, because it corresponds very well with RNFL and NRR thinning. So there are certain outliers. OCT is not helpful in this. So why there are some errors? Because it is a technology, it is constantly evolving. What we are scanning or imaging is an optic nerve head, which is a biological tissue, and it has a wide variation. There are many confounders. Glaucoma is a slow progressive disease, hence we don't know whether it is a progression is there or it is a just some variation. And because it is a statistics, there can be outliers. So always remember that this is a statistical analysis and we have to interpret it accordingly. So use of OCT as an aid can be used for glaucoma diagnosis and glaucoma progression. So we are going to hear this on various OCT technology platforms. So let's join all these puzzles together and see how it helps us. Thank you. So Dr. Sagarika?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Major General Sagarika. Now she's going to share her screen and she's going to talk us on and let us know about OptoView. So can you start sharing your slides?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes. So I'll just give you a brief introduction. So Dr. Major General Sagarika Patiar is he has an experience in glaucoma as a glaucoma consultant for more than 35 years. She served as Assistant Chief Integrated Defense Staff Medical at Army Headquarters, Head of Department of Ophthalmology at Army Hospital, Delhi, and Head of Department of Ophthalmology at Army Base Hospital, Delhi Cantonment. She was Professor of FMC Pune and only lady officer to have commanded the world's highest general hospital at Leh. She has been highly decorated officer, received Vishisht Seva and medal and Sena medal, and she had many publications in peer-reviewed journals in national and international journals. So, Dr. Sagarika, over to you. You can start your talk.
Thank you so much, Mitha, for a very nice introduction. And I'll go straight away into what about the OptoView, which we are using. Now, there has been immense amount of change in OptoView, and that's mainly because of the speed and the resolution, which has improved, the software which has come up, and along with that, the immense amount of the database which has been changing over a period of time. Now, presently, what I'm going to show you will be of the Avanti. In the Avanti, which is a Fourier domain OCT, the speed is approximately 70,000 A scans per second. Depth resolution is 5 microns, and also show you some pictures perhaps in cases of the earlier RTVU OCT. Now, the normative data is one of the most important things that we must look at. And in the RTView normative databases was collected from 10 clinical sites worldwide with 555 eyes which were enrolled in the study, mean age being 49.4, but the range has been between 18 and 82. What must be remembered is that we cannot do it in children, which is so important also for us. Ethnicities have been covered up like Asian, Hispanic, Caucasian, and African American. It scans the ONH, that is the optic nerve head, the ganglion cell complex. It also has an enhanced macular map scan, that is EMM5 scan. And so now let's have a look at the first, that is the Avanti report, that's the printout. So the first part of the scan that is there, that contains the normal information that is shown in every scan. That is the age, sex, examination of date, the time and birth, the date of the birth of the patient, as well as the patient's registration number, so that when you do the next scan, you have to verify that these are definitely the same and now you're not doing it for another patient. Oftentimes mistakes occur in this. Now comes a very important factor, and that is the quality of the scan. This is denoted in the OptoView in the form of signal strength index. As per the manufacturer, it should be 40. Now, even up to 35 people take it as, accept the scan. Why is this so important is that sometimes you'll find that when your strength, the signal strength increases, your retinal nerve fiber layer also becomes thicker. It becomes an improved resolution also is seen because when your signal strength is better. Now, if you have a look at this particular the picture that I have shown, in this is of the GCC, the first one, that is with a lot of green and red. The SSI has been shown to be 41, whereas on the same date, when the optic nerve head has been detected, it is 25. Now, on the same patient, in the same eye, why is the signal strength different? That is because when obtaining a GCC scan, the patient looks straight ahead and therefore you get a better scan. Whereas when obtaining an optic nerve head, the patient looks on the nasal side. Therefore, the iris as well as media opacities may affect the scan. Now let's go on to how do we obtain the optic nerve head scan, which is a very, very important scan. So first of all, you have the circular scans, which can be taken around the optic nerve head, and the radial scans. Mind you, both the scans have the centration is the center, they share a common center. The circular scans which are determined, these circular scans are for determining of the PP, that is the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer. The diameters of these scans vary from 1.3 to 4.9 millimeter. And whereas the radial scans are 12 of them, this is for determination of the optic nerve head margin and also for shape, and all they are approximately 3.7 millimeter in length. Once this has been obtained, after that, we have to determine this is how a map looks like. And that is, this is first of all the optic nerve head, and this is the optic cup. And after that, you can see that here will be the retinal nerve fiber layer. And this retinal nerve fiber layer in this particular patient is green in color. And after that comes the sectors, that is of the retinal nerve fiber layers. In this is the inferior and this is the superior. This is the temporal and this is the nasal. And this is a comparison with the normative data, which is present right at the side of it. In comparison, I'm showing you another patient who has, if you notice, this is red in color, the bright red color and yellow colors showing that they are very good nerve fibers, thickness, both superiorly as well as inferiorly. And along with that, there's hardly any thinning. And again, if you look at the normative data in comparison, we find that it's all green, therefore it's very good. And if you look at the retinal nerve fiber layer thickness profile, which is extremely important again, then this is done in comparison to the normative data, green, which is very good, which is a normal, yellow, which is borderline, and red, which is shown in less than 1% of the normal population. And therefore, when we trace the retinal nerve fiber layer profile into this, we find it's all in green, and therefore this is a normal nerve. What is to be remembered that the retinal nerve fiber layer, the area of the diameter is around 3.45 millimeter around the optic disc. Now, this is a very important concept because this is different from the different machines. In the OptoView, in order to determine what is the contour of the retinal nerve fiber layer, what they do is a circular scan is taken around the optic disc. And by this, there are certain bright layers that we get. The first bright layer that we get is the inner retinal nerve fiber layer. Then comes the second bright spot, that layer that we get, and this one, and this is the outer retinal nerve fiber layer. And finally, we come to the ISOS junction, and this is where the retinal nerve fiber, RPE ends, and this is a very important thing. On the other hand, now when we take a radial scan, this radial scan is passed into the optic nerve head, and this has again showing the same layers. Now, when we see the same layers over here with marked by the yellow, we find the ISOS junction terminates as it touches the optic disc. And every time you do a disc evaluation, you'll find that you'll come to the same point. Now, the tomographic landmarks, this are not present in the field, in the printout. You must go along and see it in the OCT as it is being done, or even later on, and there is no segmentation present in the printout. Again, to go back, so we have in this scan, if you can notice, this scan is not correctly placed, it's not centered, it's a 3.4 millimeter diameter radial scan in order to determine the optic nerve head shape, etc. Then comes the segmentation, which is very important for everybody to see that the top part of the segmentation should not be moved out, because in that case, you'll be missing data. And then again is the termination of the retinal pigment epithelium in the ONH border. This is completely different from the Spectralis and the Cebus machines. And if you look again, I repeat, this is the optic cup, this is the optic disc, and this is the nice thick retinal nerve fiber layers. And then after that, it is telling us about what are each of the 16 segments that are present over here, which are very, very important for us to see as to, and the figures which are present. That means that each particular segment, how much of nerve fiber thickness is present must be also seen. So in many of the maps, we only get to see 8 of them. So another comparison where you have a look at this, that here the upper part, that is the superior, temporal and nasal, it shows the thinning of of only 71 and 56 nerve fiber layer thickness, and inferiorly 94 and 68. It's very important for us to have a look at these small clock hours defects which may be missed if we just look at the sectoral average. That means because we are covering up a larger area, therefore we might miss these small defects. We must take them both together. The next area that we must have a look at are the optic nerve head parameters. The first one that tells us is what is the disc area. Very important because it will tell us if we are dealing with a large disc, as is mentioned by Medha. Then it tells us what is the cup area and the rim area. Very important also is the volume, the rim volume, nerve head volume. And what is very important for all of us, which we determine also clinically, is the cup disc ratio. And also it tells us the average RNFL thickness, where on a diameter, again, of, I'm repeating, 3.45 millimeter, it is 101, which is almost normal. Now comes the next is the profile map. This is very, very important in this particular phase. It is picture, it is black is the red is the right eye, and blue is the left eye. If we look at it, the right eye, it is showing good humps and it's present. The humps are very good and it's all in the normative data. Whereas in the left eye, we find that the humps are definitely low and it is more towards the red, showing that there is an advanced effect. But very important for us to look at is the symmetrical graph, because remember that glaucoma is a disease of asymmetry, and you find that there's immense amount of asymmetry between the right and the left eyes, both in the temporal area as well as in the inferior area. And then we come down to the other important factor, and that is the ganglion cell layer. This will help us to detect what are the problems and changes that take place in a case of glaucoma or suspicion of glaucoma. In fact, earliest changes take place because earliest is macular thinning, which takes place. So in the RT-View 100, it's a 7.7 millimeter square which is being taken, and there are 15 vertical line scans which are done, which are 7 millimeter wide, and the center is not right at the fovea, but it is slightly temporal to the fovea, approximately 0.75 to 1 millimeter temporal. And once the ganglion cell layer in an OptoView consists of the retinal nerve fiber layer, the ganglion cell layer, and the inner plexiform layers. Once we have acquired these pictures, then the software, it computes it into 3 color-coded maps. So first is a thickness map, where the colors are, if it is blue are the cooler colors, if it is black, it suggests more severe loss. Then there's a deviation map. This plays what is the percentage of thickness with respect to the normative data. And if the significance map, now this is the statistical significant thickness from normal. So there's a percentage thickness and the statistically significant thickness. These are 2 different things. So just to show you how the inner retinal layers, this is what we are measuring with the help of the OptoView. The B-scans are, there's the B-scan which shows the entire GCC complex, and the software then segments it into by the algorithms present, it segments into the various layers. So this is how the GCC looks like. This is the thickness map. As you can see that this is nice and blue, and this green, which shows that it's a good layer. If you look at this inlet, this is mind you the fovea, and this is not the optic cup, but this is the fovea. And this gives us a segmentation of the layers, as I've said about with the 3 types of scans. And what we have to remember that there are no ganglion cells present in the fovea. Now, if we look at what about the thickness map, this is the first. So these 3 are the maps which come in. So thickness map, deviation map, and the significance map. And we find the significance map again, the GCC average is very, very important. It shows all the parameters. And here this is showing us that the fovea is marked. This often gets mistaken by people as the optic disc. And these are the summary parameters and which must be seen. Now, most important in this is the FLV and the GSV. The FLV shows significant loss of GCC numerically, and it's the most sensitive parameter signifying difference. Now, if we look at the visual field and the GCC, we find that it's a 10-2 is a very important thing that we must do. Now, in this is showing a severe structural loss, and this is correlating with the visual field. Similarly, advanced, which is showing a significant loss in the form of red and the visual field. And again, the GCC as well as the RNFL, which are corresponding. And this is the progression analysis. And this is the GCC analysis, which is showing us also the rate of change in this. And this is the RNFL analysis, which is again showing the rate of change in here, which tells us how we must loss. So if in RTView, in RNFL progression, if we have a 10% loss, if it is confirmed, then we know that there is an RNFL definite loss. In GCC, we find that if there is a 5% loss, again, this is again very important. So there's one patient, 42-year-old. She had thin, CDR was thin, was 0.7, NRR was thin, and she had a pressure of right eye was 25, and thin corneas, as you can see in the right eye, there's definitely a change. And the OCT has confirmed that there is thinning. This is corresponding with the field. The 70-year-old, 4-year-old man who again has 0.7 and 0.9, pressures were high, and the CCT was lesser. And this is also showing the field effect. And most important, this is the FLB and the GLB. And most important for us is therefore to choose the right protocol, adjust the scan, check the strength, check the signal profile, check correlation with visual field, compare the normative data, involve the patient, of course, consider the cost of the patient. Thank you for a patient hearing.
Okay.
Moving my screen. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sagarika. It was a very wonderful and comprehensive coverage of the OptoView OCT. Next, we welcome Dr. Medha Prabhudesai. Although she needs no introduction, I would just make the formality of introducing her. She is has experience as a glaucoma consultant for the last 30 years. Medical graduation and post-graduation from the prestigious BJ Medical College in Pune, and fellowship in glaucoma and anterior segment from prestigious Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai. She was an ex-cataract glaucoma consultant at Ganpati Nethralaya, Jalna, and 1994 onwards, she's been a director at the Prabhudesai Eye Clinic and honorary assistant professor of ophthalmology at Bharati Vidyapeeth Medical College, Pune. She's authored the Atlas of Optic Nerve Head Evaluation in Glaucoma, which is an excellent imaging book and should be referred by all. She has researched on the international phase 3 studies in bioequivalence of glaucoma medication. She's a faculty for multiple national and international conferences and has many papers and presentations at all prestigious fora internationally. Just to add my personal word of appreciation for her, I think she has one of the best imaging collection for fundus photographs and OCTs in the country. So over to you, Dr. Medha.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin, for a nice introduction. I'm going to talk on Triton swept source OCT. So OCT, we have seen evolution. Time domain had 4,400 scans per second, and this I had in 2005. Spectral domain I had 2012, and swept source now I'm having for last 4 years. So coming to swept source SSOCT. So it's a multimodal OCT with a high speed of wavelength of 1000 nm. Coherent light is sent to the eye and with reference mirror. Reflected light is collected by detector, and a Fourier transformation is applied. It compares various frequencies from different structures and shows different structures, but in a same single image. So it has automatic 7-layered segmentation, pinpoint registration is there, compare function is there, 3D volumetric layer detection algorithm is there, and automatic image acquisition process is there, which has autofocus and auto shoot. Various retinal layers, including the choroidal layers, can be seen with the help of swept source. And it has an advantage that it has improves the signal to noise ratio because of this moving image averaging. Better B-scan images there, and we can get a macula and disc in same scan. Also, it has a single wide field cube scan of 9 by 12 mm, and the total acquisition time is only 1.3 seconds, and we can quickly diagnose based on this a glaucomatous damage. It also shows a fast signal image and RFFL thickness image. So let's come and see the drawback. Any drawbacks, blink artifact, they can give rise to loss of data, and the interpretation would be difficult. Media opacities like cataract or vitreous opacities can give rise to segmentation errors. There can be decentration, myopia. Obviously, we know that it's not helpful. OCT is not helpful in this. And in advanced glaucoma, because of the floor effect, it is not possible to manage progression. Peripapillary ERM and diabetic retinopathies can give rise to overestimation of RNFL and GCC. So coming to its uses, so we can use this for diagnosis, Hood report, OCT angio, trend analysis also, and ASOCT is also available with this. So ASOCT, we can diagnose narrow angle and open angle with the help of ASOCT. Now let's see how to read printouts. The most important is image quality. So it should be higher, more than 40. Then only we can have this printout for our reading and interpretation. Then check for centration. Also check for segmentation errors in this window. Other artifacts also can be seen here. Then after that is the most important is disk photography, and disk area can be seen. Vertical CD is most important. After that, RNFL and nesting is important. RNFL symmetry is very, very important in right and left. Thickness map and superpixel 200 should be seen after that. Here we also get GCC++, that is GCL plus IPL plus RNFL. Now let's see how we can correlate with ONH. Now here we know that there is a high CD ratio over here, and you can see that the GCL everything looks normal, even RNFL symmetry is normal. So this can be just a high CD with large disk. You can see the disk area is very high. Then how to correlate ONH and visual field. Here you can see that there is a almost looks like normal, but superior thinning is there. And left side, there is vertical enlargement with thinning of NRR, and you can see the RNFL defects here. So when we do OCT, we can see that the other areas are absolutely normal, and there are certain RNFL defects. Now we need to compare that with others. And here you see that the disk area is normal. RNFL symmetry is just 60%. There is thinning of NRR, and it is superior temporal as well as inferior temporal is much more. So here in the GCC++ scan, we can see all the results all the things which we saw with ONH photographs are correlating with this. Even the perimetry is correlating, though right eye still has a pre-perimetric glaucoma. So coming to the next thing, that is Hood report, which is an exclusive top-con web source OCT. This we get a derived circular scan, in-fast image, there can be circumpapillary RNFL scan, and there is a probability map which is on which the superimposed visual points would be there. So this answers the following questions. Is optic neuropathy present? Where is the damage? Is it within the 8 degrees of fixation? The macula-centric scan is available with Hood, and this is displayed as nestin and not as Tisnit. So this is what we has a Tisnit, but here from temporal to temporal, and there can be loss of macular images and macular data, but here we have a macula-centric scan, and here you can see if the central defects are there, they are within the central 10 degrees of 10 degree visual field, and if there are away 15 degrees away from this, it can be seen as nasal step. So again, a patient disc asymmetry is there in the right and left eye, and you can see that the RNFL GCC thinning is there left eye much more as compared to the right eye. And in Hood report, if you see, there is inferior part, and it has shown as nasal step over here. Even the 10-2, you can see there is certain points which are depressed in 10-2 fields. So left eye, obviously there is loss, and you can see that there is patterns and deviation. 24-2 also the damage corresponds, and even in 10-2. So coming to trend analysis, this is a very good analysis, and it shows us how the disease is progressing. And you can see even the other areas like other GCC plus RNFL and other layers, you can see how they are progressing in this. So one patient, a patient who came actually for LASIK, and we saw there was a very thin RNFL defect inferior temporally in the right eye, and we did perimetry and OCT for this, and we could find that there is an RNFL thinning, and we wanted to see how it's progressing. So this is a Hood report where it corresponds with the visual field in 24-2, and this is a trend analysis, and we know that it is not progressing very rapidly, and the stability is there. Coming to OCT angio, this also can be seen on SweatSource, and it is commercially available since 2015. It is a non-invasive technique, and we can have angiographic images in seconds, and it can measure retinal peripapillary capillaries around the ONH. So there are reports in advanced glaucoma, there is loss of peripapillary capillary density. Even in diurnal variation in open angle glaucoma, there is loss of these defects. So Qualitatively, sparser vascular networks are seen more severe glaucoma, and lower values of peripapillary and macular vessel density are associated with glaucoma progression and glaucomatous damage. So one patient, just want to show you one example. This patient had a superior inferior RNFL defect in right eye and inferior temporal in the left eye. And we can see how the defects and the layers are correlate very well. So this is superior inferior damage in RNFL, GCL, IPL, IPL, INL, INL, OPL, and even up to ONL, but not so much in photoreceptors. So applications of this can be done, have in research. So this can be additional marker for identifying glaucoma. We can have early detection. We can see risk of disease progression and monitor patients with advanced glaucoma. It may be helpful in patients who perform poorly on visual fields and who can have RNFL artifacts on OCT analysis. And if it is only IOP is not only the cause of POG and this is another factor, we can have additional treatments for this. So let's see, consider these studies. So this is an Optos image. You can see that there is an inferior RNFL defect in the eyes, and this is visual field where you can see not very much appreciable defects, but some depressed decibels in both the eyes. And this is RNFL. So here, definitely GCC plus analysis showing inferior temporal defect, left more than the right. OCT angio, you can see that there is an inferior defect here in the right eye, which corresponds with hood analysis. And you can have slope of superior inferior RNFL thinning. Left eye again is showing inferior RNFL defect, which is seen in hood analysis over here. The NFAS image and the thickness image also is showing defect over here. So this is another patient of a very poor compliance, and you can see on visual fields the GPA is progressing very fast in the left eye. Definitely that is advanced cupping in the left eye. Even the 10-2 is showing the same thing. And here on visual field, we are seeing a same thing, that is right eye and left eye more advanced, and includes even the field loss in central 10 degrees over here. So trend analysis, if we see left eye is progressing at a faster rate, and the rate is much more higher into a temporal, superior and inferior quadrants. And here right eye looks shows stability, but the left eye is progressing at a very fast rate. So this we can consider and have like manage patient properly. So most important thing is OCT will show any nerve abnormality, because basically it is a nerve analysis. So this patient, you can see that the pallor was more than cupping, and these were his fields. When they did OCT, right eye is showing damage, but it is disproportionate. So when we asked patient to do MRI, and the patient had multiple problems like microvascular changes, cerebral atrophy was there, even carotid bulb narrowing was there. So something else other than glaucoma also can be diagnosed on OCT. Another patient was on multiple drugs for 12 years and he had field defects this. So this is not a typical glaucoma defect. So you advised MRI, and patient had an old infarct posterior tip of the right occipital cortex. So all these things can be diagnosed and managed with the help of OCT. Managing glaucoma is very, very important. And another patient of AIN, though it is showing an inferior arterial defect, when patient came after 2 years, typical glaucoma field, because we knew and the pallor and cupping are not matching, definitely this was not a NTG or glaucoma diagnosis, and we could treat accordingly. So best utilization for OCT for glaucoma is when we match the OCT analysis and ONH changes and always correlate with visual fields. We have to analyze entire report and not just numbers or colors. We have to look for focal change and not for overall change. Watch for media opacities and segmentation errors, identify errors, artifacts, and reason behind these errors. Also account for myopia and other comorbid conditions, and always do a detailed retinal evaluation along with OCT macula. Thank you for your patient hearing. I'll stop sharing my screen. So our next talk is by Dr. Mayuri. Please start, share your slides. Yes. Dr. Mayuri is a glaucoma consultant at Ocuera Eye Care Research Center, And she was at Raghudeep Eye Care, Ahmedabad. She's ex-associate professor at M&J Institute of Ophthalmology, Ahmedabad. She is working as a glaucoma specialist since 35 years, and she has a best paper research paper award by Glaucoma Society of India in 2016. Also, R.N. Mathur oration by All Gujarat Ophthalmological Society. She is recipient of multiple awards, and she has published many papers in the national and international journals and presented at various conferences. She was organizing national secretary at national level, CME Glaucoma convene, and every year she has held these many posts like this, and held organization positions for GSI, GO, that is Glaucoma Ophthalmologists, and AOS also. She was honorary treasurer of Glaucoma Society of India between 2020 to 2022. So over to you, Dr. Mayuri.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I will be talking on the interpretation of the Zeiss Cirrus PSOCT. My work and the presentation is going to be faster even, because previous two speakers has covered a lot of aspects, so I will not go into the detail. We know that the early detection of the glaucoma is must to prevent the damage or prevent the blindness. And the structural damage of the glaucoma should be detected earlier, because the functional damage will take some time. So the continuum shown here, we should come up somewhere here, and it is possible to get this with the help of OCT. The optic nerve and RNFL changes usually occur first, and more than 20% of the retinal ganglion cell could be lost before visual field defects develop. And intraocular pressure and visual fields like diagnostic sensitivity, they have a lot of variations. That's why disc and RNFL changes are of a very important part. And that can be examined by taking the disc photographs and the imaging technique. Three techniques, the modalities are available. And we are going to talk on the OCT, and I will restrict myself to the Zeiss Cirrus OCT. The imaging objective tool has excellent reproducibility and very user-friendly. And perimetric detection could be possible, and it has an age-matched normative database. So it has the ability to quantify and measure the rate of change over time. It is the high-resolution cross-sectional tomographical images of the retina and disc. It is the real-time image quality information. It is similar to B-scan sonography. And here the infrared light of 850 nanometer is used. And it measures the echo delay time reflected and backscattered from the retinal layers and converted into the pictorial method. So Cirrus has an ultra high speed. It's able to capture 70,000 to 3,12,000 scans per minute. Also produce three-dimensional image, high resolution and more precise high resolution image. Can we have others mic muted, please? So this machine has a capacity automatically to define the age of the disc as a termination of the Brooks membrane, as shown here. And this is done at multiple layers all around the nerve head. And that is why it has no problem with the small tilted disc or the large crescent. As I said, the optic disc, multiple softwares are available. It is useful to have optic disc 200 by 200 data cube, and it automatically identifies the optic disc cup boundaries, and this is the calculation circle which is automatically centered over the disc. This is operator non-dependent and produce precise and reproducible measurement of the neuroretinal rim. What we get out of this technology is quantitative as well as qualitative measurement of optic nerve head, retinal nerve fiber thickness, ganglion cell complex, as well as macular thickness. The numeric values compared to the normative database for all parameters are shaded white, green, yellow, or red. Yellow means the normal population of only 5% can have this value, and red means it is highly significant, hardly anybody can have that. And white means it is more than what is expected in the normal. Now, Post acquisition, the auto center function automatically centers the calculation circle, which is of a 3.4 millimeter diameter around the optic disc. So if you see this circle is not well positioned, you have to retake the image. Now, this is the printout of the Cirrus OCT. So the uppermost part that you see here as the patient's data, and the patient data, the name, and just like perimetry, we have to enter it correctly, and also correctly enter the date of birth so that we can have age match comparison. And as other speakers has mentioned, signal strength should be very good, and in this machine more than 7 is the acceptable signal strength. If it is less, then we have to redo the capturing. Now then comes the key parameter.
Can others please mute? There is lot of background noise, especially technical people.
Please stop others. And the key parameters are shown here. They have a comparison to the normal database as displayed in the table format, and it is color coded according to the probability of this being borderline or abnormal. This database has a disk area, rim area, average CD ratio vertical, then cup volume, average RNFL thickness, and superior RNFL thickness and inferior RNFL thickness. The normative database for this machine is ranging between the age of 18 years to 84 years. The next in the line is RNFL thickness map. It is the topographical display of the RNFL, and it has an hourglass shape of yellow and red color in typical normal eyes. And it also has a mask which shows the cup as well as the disc. And then this is the NFAS OCT fundus image. This fundus image cannot replace the actual fundus image, and it shows the boundaries of the cup, disc, and RNFL calculation circle, which is of 3.46 millimeter diameter, centered exactly on the center of the optic disc. Machine has vectors, and while taking the image, you can just center it if it is not properly set. And it indicates the variance from the pixels that you see color coded indicates the variance from the normal. So RNFL deviation map is very good tool to facilitate the discussion with the patient. You can show them large size cup, depth, as well as the red and yellow color, and then they become more compliant. So neuroretinal rim thickness profile is the next. It is in the graph form, and it is a T-Z curve. It is also matched with the normative database, and also shows the comparison of right eye and the left eye. You can see here how it is being done in this patient. And then RNFL T-Z graph is displayed, the patient's RNFL measurement along the calculation circle, compared again to the normative database, and shows the anomaly and symmetry between the two eyes. And the distribution of the normals diversification is shown here. What are the samples of that? The gray here suggests that this data cannot be matched with the normative database. It is outside the whatever is there with the machine. Now is the quadratic and clock hour average analysis, and the thickness values is matched with the normative data, and the values are given in the microns, which are useful for the future comparison. The clock hour analysis can help us in identifying even the smaller defect, which is not possible with the quadratic analysis. Now the B scan on the side of the printout is for the horizontal and vertical through the center of the disc. The red line is that of RNFL and cup boundary, and this is the black dot that you see is the end of the RP layer. So it is the disc boundary, and their RNFL calculation or a circular tomography is shown here in a straight line, and this may show you the segmental errors. So this is also very important to study. People usually overlook this area. So normative database, what are they for different parameters? The optic nerve head parameters are based on the age and disc size. RNFL parameters are based only on the age of the patient. As I said, it is between 18 to 84. And when the disc area is outside the normal limits, which is less than 1.3 millimeter square or greater than 2.5 millimeter square, the normative data comparison is not applicable. And that's why this box is shaded. All the data are shaded into the gray color. And the refractive error available with the machine is -12 to +8 diopter. Now, ganglion cell complex, which includes the ganglion cell layer and IPL thickness. And we know that RGC layer is thickest at the perimacular region, and decrease in the total macular thickness has been observed in many glaucomatous eyes and likely due to thinning of the ganglion cell layer in the glaucoma patient. So ganglion cell analysis is another software available which adds the complementary information to standard RNFL and ONH analysis, provides the assessment of the structure essential for the central vision. And that's why nowadays we are using this a lot for the ocular hypertensive patients or very early case of glaucoma. It helps us in detecting the early defect and shows the deviation from the normal perfusion. This is how the printout comes. And first is the thickness map, which shows the thickness measurement of the GCL and IPL in 6 millimeter by 6 millimeter cube, and contains an elliptical annulus centered above the fovea. And the normative, again, database and the values are shown here on the bar next to it. Then is the deviation map, which shows the comparison of the GCC with the normative database. And then the thickness table is available, which shows the average GCC thickness as well as the minimum GCC thickness in the elliptical annulus. And then the sector map is available with the values and color coding. And this is the horizontal and vertical B scan. So ganglion cell analysis should also be compared with the visual field. As Medha has already said, that patients should have total comparison, not only one modality to be taken into account. Now, this machine also has a GPA analysis, which gives you event analysis and trend analysis, which is a rate of the change. So for GPA, first two images are taken or scans are taken as a baseline, and then another 4 subsequently you can take. So when there is a first time change, it's yellow in the color is shown here. But if the change is seen in subsequent also images, then it is red in the color. The TICSI progression graph is also showing you where the changes and comparison between the two eyes are given. And summary parameter trend analysis is also available in the graph form. And the summary table will give you the RNFL thickness map, which suggests the progression. And the check marks are given according to the possibility or likely loss or the possible of the increase. The RNFL thickness profile is mainly for the broader or focal changes, while thickness map will give you focal changes and average will give you the diffuse changes. Lastly, the machine can also help in the optic neuritis or disc-related edema, papilloedema, and it has a typical mushroom pattern as shown here of the papillitis, and the patient can be monitored using this machine, this technology, whether there and artifacts are there, which could be because of the blinking or the poor quality scan, or the missing data could be because of the opacity. Here it is shown the vitreous floater is obscured. To conclude, imaging gives documentation and detection of the optic nerve and RNFL changes, and use good quality images always in conjunction with the complete clinical examination for the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayuri. This was an extensive talk, and you had explained in very detail and very minor thing, everything. So it is very easy now for each and everyone and general ophthalmologist to how to interpret and to know what this OCT printout is showing. Thank you for your extensive, good talk. Now I would like to invite Dr. Sachin Darwadkar for his next talk on OCT Inspectralis machine. So he is a director of glaucoma services, Aditya Jyot Eye Hospital. He is director, Samartha Clinics, Andheri also. He's a practicing glaucoma specialist in Mumbai since 14 years, and his main area is focus in modulation of wound healing in glaucoma surgery, glaucoma post-VR surgery, and ophthalmic imaging related to glaucoma, and low-cost optic neuritis and anterior segment photography. He has published articles on automated perimetry, OCT in glaucoma in peer-reviewed journals, apart from various chapters in various books, and his faculty at various national and international conferences. He has published many papers, and he is organizing treasurer of the Silver Jubilee GSI conference held in Mumbai in 2015. So Dr. Sachin Dharwadkar, we are waiting for your presentation now. Can you please start sharing your slides?
Yeah, madam. I'll just thank you for that kind introduction. I'll just start sharing my screen. Just let me know when it is seen. Is it seen?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
You can.
Yeah. Okay. After after all the nice and elaborate talks, in my talk, I would just highlight the differences in this machine from the previous machines, and just go to some clinical examples and just tell you what protocol I follow and why. So when I started using imaging in glaucoma, this was 10 years ago, we had to find out what machine suits me. So I had done some basic research, and with the literature that was available, with certain parameters, I decided to go in with the Spectralis. There were certain important considerations that you have to take when you start using imaging technology, and that we can cover right now, but these are the certain things that you need to see. So like the interoperator reproducibility and also the resolution. So now coming to imaging in glaucoma, it's been an Achilles heel. It's never been easy, and people are still skeptical to use imaging as a tool for progression. There are certain reasons for that. So imaging in glaucoma is requiring certain major quality checks. You need to see the image scores. You need to see the refraction status to compare it to the database. You need BMO verification. You need segmentation and contour checks, and you need to check out for major changes like PVD which occur with time. Now this machine does give us three scan choices: 3.5, the 4.1, and the 4.7, which is exclusive to this machine, so that you can escape the area of peripapillary atrophy as well as a myopic conus, as well as myelinated nerve fibers at the disc, and get still good scans in each and every patient. There are 48 BMO identification points, which I think is very, very important, because these BMO points will ultimately decide how good your disc scan and the MRW output is. So it's like garbage in, garbage out. If your data input is not good, the analysis is not good either. So what you have to understand is that the BMO identification is the critical point of any machine, and here in this machine you can actually identify and correct the BMO contour lines, which I think is not possible in most of the machines. So this is very, very important, because the moment this goes wrong, all the entire analysis will go wrong. A little influence of cataract and pupil, but I don't follow this dictum from the companies, because I believe in maintaining a standard imaging quality all throughout, and the influence of cataract definitely will change the machine RNFL thickness. So I use standard imaging conditions like a dilated pupil in most of my cases, unless contraindicated, and see for lens opacities in great detail. So use of imaging in glaucoma decision making is very demanding process. So normative databases, just for the knowledge, you have European, USA, and Japanese ethnic descent, 18 to 90 years of age. The Indian is still awaited, but a significant number which is comparable to most machines. Now, which is the best map for glaucoma interpretation? Now, you get many maps in many machines, and you have to choose the ones which give you the most information. Remember, you're not in front of the machine most of the time. So you should be sure that all the quality checks are there in the maps that you interpret, so that you do not miss anything and don't interpret maps which are wrong. So you need to have a segmentation map, you need to have an image score, you need to have the anatomy of the entire neuron. So never do RNFL in isolation or a ganglion cell in isolation. You have to see both together. So you have choices like OU, the MRW asymmetry, the summary, the Hood report, all these things are there. I would just tell you what I do and what is my choice with the reasons. So remember, this is the ganglion cell body, the tail and the axon terminals. They are part of one neuron. So you can't see in isolation. So this is like seeing the elephant only with the ear and the tail and not the head if you don't see the ganglion cell layer at the time when you examine the RNFL or the rim. So always remember, see the entire neuron. My choice of charts in the Spectralis is the OU report and the glaucoma overview. The reason is simple. In the OU report, I see the SLO image, which is again a trademark of the Spectralis, because you do not have an SLO in most of the machines. And there you can see exactly the place where the BMO center is located. You can see the size of the Brooks membrane opening, which has been documented, and this FODI or the fovea disc axis, which is the trademark for cyclotorsion adjustment in the Spectralis, which is very, very important. Now, what I do next is basically align. You have another option to see these reports here. You have the MRW RNFL asymmetry single analysis, where you have the macular thickness map asymmetry, which can detect early changes in glaucoma. So when you have these three maps, you have the disc, you have the RNFL, and you have the macula all in one. Exactly as I told you, the entire neuron in one picture. You do not have any segmentation picture here, so I prefer to have another OU map, which gives me the RNFL segmentation, the quality checks, and the status of the posterior vitreous, which again is not seen in many machines. So structure correlation is very important. You have to know the entire anatomy of the neuron. Now see the important features that I usually look at. I look at the disc diameter, the scanning circle diameter, the posterior vitreous. Now this is very clear here, the posterior vitreous attachments. In case there is a PVD, this will alter, the RNFL contour will alter. So I have my answer. Here I have the quality checks in place. A Q score of more than 15 is acceptable, but I use more than 20, 25 as the standard. The more the score, the better your imaging technology, imaging methodology. Then you go to the OU map. On the OU map on the left side, here you can see the Garvey-Heath sectors. These are for the RNFL. These Garvey-Heath sectors have a parenthesis here, which indicate the similarity of the patient's reading in that particular sector as compared to that of the normative database, which is adjusted to age as well as the BMO size. So this gets very, very, very specific to the database and very specific to that individual patient. So this this becomes as good as it gets. Even here you have something called as the CC, or the compensation for the refraction. We have to make sure that to apply your data to the normative database, this CC is in place. So there are so many quality checks that you need to put in before you go in to interpret an image. So the important points that you need to see are interhemispheric asymmetry, inter-eye structural correlation, inter-eye asymmetry, and clinical correlation. So these are the points that I usually see. So prototype cases in different glaucomas, I'll just highlight in a jiffy. You see this early disease here. If you can see, you on clinical examination, there was a RNFL defect. So here you can see there is a depression in the MRW. There is a depression which is local, which is not picked up in the sectoral Garvey-Heath maps. But you know that there is a definite notching here. And here you can see that the pi of the ganglion cell complex that is eaten away. So this is very, very clear here that you've got a localized defect, which you wouldn't have picked up in case you would have just seen the interpretation of the scans and not seen it very closely clinically. So here you can have inter-eye asymmetry also is very, very significant. Compare both the eyes and you can see the donut intact here and the donut eaten away on this side. Now go to the pre-perimetric glaucoma. This is one case seen in 2013 and 15. Clinically appears to be completely okay. But if you see the average RNFL thickness, it has changed from 94 to 79, and which is very, very, very significant. And this is before the perimetric defect took place. The perimetry was absolutely normal. So this is a case of pre-perimetric glaucoma. Even the 10-2 test in this patient was normal. Now see an established case of open angle glaucoma. Here you have the T-SNIT of the RNFL showing a sectoral decrease in the superior and inferior pole in the right eye and both poles in the left eye. You can see a classical correlation with the nasal step here, biaccurate scotoma here, whereas the ganglion cell is eaten on one side, eaten on the other side, but the opposite side is absolutely normal. This is what I want to tell you, that this ganglion cell or the RNFL alone will not give you the total picture. Both when considered together will give you the total picture. Here you can see RNFL sector superior and inferior, both are thinned, corresponding to the scotoma. The ganglion cell is corresponding only to one part of the scotoma. So all these things you have to keep in mind. Now, normal tension glaucoma, you know that these maps have scotomas near fixation. Beautifully demonstrated here. You can see localized thinning of the RNFL in both eyes here inferiorly, corresponding to the notching of the RNFL in the Tisnett curve, corresponding to the scotomas near the center. And you can see that almost half of the ganglion cell layer is wiped out. So it's very, very classical correlation. You see the entire ganglion cell throughout its length, and picture becomes very, very clear. Angle closure disease, picture is slightly different. Now, if you see both discs, a curve disc ratio appears quite okay. There is a mild pallor in the right hand side. Now, this is obviously a serous map, but it appears similar in the spectralis, where you see that there is a diffuse ganglion cell loss as compared to the loss in the RNFL. So this is very, very classical of ischemic damage. Now you see this patient who's a disc suspect. If you see is a 15-year-old female, you have all the Garvey sectors which are abnormal, but this does not look a classical glaucoma. If you see this case very clearly, curve disc ratio is very normal, but what you see is the ganglion cell maps show a great amount of thinning in the ganglion cell layer, which is not classical of glaucoma, that the RNFL and the ganglion cell being so abnormal, and there being no progression over time without any anti-glaucoma treatment. So this patient turned out to be a case of hereditary optic neuropathy. So these are the variations that you need to know, which resemble glaucoma, but may not essentially be glaucoma in the first place. Now, certain neurological cases that you need to know here. You can see these Garvey sectors here. These are like a bow tie appearance in the left eye and a superior and inferior sector in the right eye. Now, this is a very, very classical pattern. If you've seen this very closely, this is of a optic tract lesion. This was a case of Devick's disease, which was being treated as glaucoma elsewhere. And you can see this. This is a bitemporal or rather homonymous defect of the macular ganglion cell layer. So this is, never forget to see all parts of the neuron. That is the take home message. Spectralis progression also you can make out very easily. You can see progression as clinically as widening of defect or appearance of new defect. You can see changes in average thickness, and you can see changes in the decibel value. Rate of thinning in normal people is 0.15 to 0.56. For spectralis, you can pick up as small as 2 micron changes due to its horizontal and axial resolution. Now, macular ganglion cell maps, for detection of early changes, you can get event analysis maps like this. With changing time, you can get 2 time frames and the difference map below. So this can be similar to what you call as an event analysis on the serous. You can get a timeline of progression by plotting the different parameters like the average ganglion cell layer thickness over time. Whenever there is a potential outlier, it has been definitely pointed out, and you can go back to the image and see the quality scores. As far as the sectoral maps are concerned, you can delineate each sector also over a period of time. And as you can make out here, the temporal superior sector is progressively thinning over time, and the map can be easily denoted the stability and the progression on the sectoral progression maps. So this is very, very important, but always remember that these maps are less important than the kind of image that you obtain in the first place. So make sure that every image you obtain follows the standard criteria that I outlined in the first slide. Now, a few comments about tilted disc. Tilted disc and myopia are the things which are always a Pandora's box in imaging. And here you can see clearly, irrespective of myopia and tilted disc, scans are very easily obtained, and over a period of time, the scans are stable. So the disc suspect, which looks almost like a glaucoma, can be exonerated from the treatment and unnecessary follow-ups that might be accrued due to an abnormal imaging or a abnormal clinical examination. So the take-home message is spectralis can be robust in preperimetric disease, glaucoma progression, and neurological problems. It offers special advantages in being fast and reproducible. You can have changeable contour lines, which you cannot do in most of the machines, and visualization of a posterior vitreous, which is very, very robust when you want to make out certain unexplained changes in glaucoma follow-ups. So thank you for your patient hearing. I'm open to questions if any.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. It was a very extensive talk. We have one question from audience, but we will take after Dr. Bhadoria's talk is over. So now I would like Dr. Colonel Madhu Bhadoria to share her slides. Dr. Bhadoria is a director at Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, Sitapur, Uttar Pradesh. She has experience as glaucoma consultant for more than 35 years. She had her medical and post-medical graduation at King George Medical University, Lucknow. She did fellowship of glaucoma and anterior segment from Shankar Netralaya, Chennai. She was professor at FMC Pune for almost 30 years. Now she is director at Sitapur for 12 years, and she transformed the Sitapur Eye Hospital from ruins to vibrancy. And for this, she has got very prestigious awards. She is a PG teacher and examiner at multiple universities, and she has published and presented at multiple national and international forums, including AO, ARVO, AIS, and also GSI. And she was a past president of few organizations also. So I would like Dr. Colonel Madhubalaria to tell us on present day status and importance of OCT.
Thank you, Medha. It's really nice being here. And now my job is actually to sum up what you all have said and how to put it into practice, right? So for glaucoma diagnosis, we need to have a structure and function correlation. But in many occasions, it's not really possible because patient is a very important factor which doesn't play up in the function. So if it's not a structure to function, then we can go from structure to structure. In that way, OCT comes as another option of imaging, which is not only giving us the picture, but also giving us quantification and changes over time, which is really important in terms of RNFL ganglion cells more than disc. So what all do we have in OCT today? Let's not forget TD-OCT, something that came first, then SD-OCTs, SS-OCTs, and OCT angiography. So this is the first OCT, TD-OCT, which I used in 2002. And believe me, I've just been growing on OCTs from that time onwards. It's still not a useless device, but because multiple small practices are using it, it gives disc parameters, RNFL thickness, macular changes, but not GCC, serial analysis of progression, but why not preferred? It has poor resolution, and the time taken for acquisition is really much longer, as a result of which the data quality is poor. So it's not really in good clinics, but it is still of significant use when needed. So what is available these days is basically SD-OCT, and most of the people are using SD-OCT. So whatever comes in retina glaucoma goes practically piggyback. But is it only for the financial sustenance? The answer is maybe yes and no both. Now, the important differences in SD and TD, which are for us to know, are what is the clinical basis? The clinical basis is actually high resolution, axial as well as lateral, plus high speed of acquisition. So whenever the speed of high is high, like these people have already shown multiple numbers, so I won't go into that. The artifacts and the chances of data quality becoming poor are less. And high resolution in the best of machines can go up to 3 microns. So what we have is a very, very good quality data. So I won't go into the whole table, but it's important for here to realize that axial resolution in different machines is different. Scanning speed is different. Manufacturing signals are different, and RNFL scanning protocols are different. So all these three give very different kind of maps. Therefore, we cannot use one OCT report to check the progression or with another OCT machine. So if a patient has to be seen forward, it has to be seen from OCT of the same kind. Macular scanning has a similar kind of a thing, but the fundamental challenge is some machines are taking only GCC and IPL, but there are many machines which are taking GCC, IPL, and RNFL thickness. So the data is going to be entirely different. Now come down to SS-OCT. Medha has gone into huge details, and I'm very happy about it, that she has told here the advantage is what Medha has told. Other than that, we can see all the three parameters on single page. So therefore, for us to correlate macula, disc, and RNFL together is a great boon in this machine. So coming to OCT and value of optic disc in OCT, truly, unfortunately, the OCT has never really been able to give the wonderful thing of the disc due to different reasons. And all these reasons have been explained in great detail by all the authors. So the crux is that is the variability of disc size, tilt, torsion, peripapillary atrophy, potential artifacts, and more important than everything else, a very important parameter is the disc hemorrhage, which can really not be picked up at all on a OCT. So therefore, the OCT of the disc can never replace the OCT fundus picture, which gives so many more things. So coming to RNFL, RNFL is the most important parameter when it comes to early detection. Average and inferior, especially inferior temporal and superior. These are the these are the RNFL which are reduced or lost, but we got to keep in mind the green disease when glaucoma is actually there, we are not picking it up, and the red disease when actually the disc is of something else like a high myope or a neurological disease, and we are thinking in terms of glaucoma. Another important point is the asymmetry of RNFL. If the RNFL in the two eyes are different in their thickness by more than 9 microns, it's significant. So despite things maybe being green, we got to really think in terms of to look for a little more and dig out glaucoma. So macula in detection of early glaucoma. Sachin showed a beautiful picture in which he had shown the RGC. Now these RGCs are typically, like they are hexagonals and they are stout. Whereas if you look at the RNFL, it's like a rope. So RNFL like a rope is easy to see when it becomes thinner rather than that thick structure. So therefore, RNFL changes actually for early detection come before macular changes are visible or they can be detected. This is a point that we really need to understand. But yes, they must correlate. Like you're seeing this picture over here. This is an RNFL change and it's correlating with the macula right there. So coming to OST and early POAG, this is a dilemma which Mayuri brought out. Here is a lady who's got 80s of 26 and 24 normal CCT, gonio angles open. She was not on any treatment. Now look at her disc. It is physiological cupping up front, but look at the fields. They're looking so awful. But when you look at the OCT, you will find absolutely normal RNFL. So if the RNFL are normal, structure to structure correlation, we're dealing with an OHT and we're not dealing with the early POAG. The same way for moderate POAG or CG, any one of them. If the disc field correlate well, we don't need to do OCT actually, but it's not always so. So this is a 50-year-old female who's got angle closure. We did a PI 6 months ago and called her for review. She comes with pressures of 18 and 16. We looked at the disc. The right disc is showing a cup of 0.6 to 0.7. But when we look at the fields of the left eye are looking worse, which is not possible really with the cup and disc ratio of 0.2, 0.3. Now we look at the RNFL. The right side of RNFL is looking awful. It's so much reduced. And same is the upper and lower poles both are affected. So it is a patient who has progressed and we need to do something about the treatment. This is another lady who's a 61-year-old lady. Again, looks very physiological on the cups. But what we see here is that visual field effects are so much like advanced glaucoma. Now, what do we do? Do an OCT. An OCT here, if we look at it, is looking perfectly fine. So with a normal, perfectly fine OCT, she is a normal patient. She actually doesn't really have a glaucoma, but physiological cups. And we keep her under follow-up. In advanced glaucomas, if we really look at it, there's really nothing in RNFL or macula. So we follow only on visual. We see these patients on visual fields. But in progression, OCT has a very smart role because the 4 micron thickness also may be important. So in a diagnosed case of glaucoma, an instrument which is repeatable and reproducible is of extreme use. So early glaucoma to moderate glaucoma, we do this on actually RNFL. RNFL and visual fields, they correlate very well, though one is linear and one is actually in logs. But in moderate glaucomas, it does pretty well. And the detection is a challenged thing because we don't really have any standard definition of progression. Test-retest variability of visual field is a lot. Subjective assessment of serial disc photos is very subjective. So we need to have something which is more reproducible and something which is a lot more quantifiable. In that comes the role of OCT. And progression with RNFL and macula both is important. If the patient is early or patient is moderate, we go with the thinning of RNFL because it is detected early. It's earlier detected than macula, and thinning is suggestive of progression. For that, I already told there is some age-related loss as well. But 4 micron to 10 micron is suspicious area, and more than 10 definitely is progression. And there are different maps which these people have already told you. Coming to progression in advanced glaucomas. So far, advanced glaucomas, we have only been seeing on 10-2, but that is very subjective. But where is the challenge in OCT? The challenge comes with a floor defect. But this floor defect, unfortunately, is different in different machines. Like for Spectalis 49, then for Cirrus is 57, and for RTView is 64. So once RNFL thickness reaches its progression to the bottom, we switch back to now macula because these thicker things reduce slowly. So now we have something, and here we have, Medha's already told, we have a GCC and GCC plus plus. So we can have both these parameters. And if you look at the macula, normal is 82, early glaucoma 75, moderate 64, and advanced 55.6. So up to 55.6, we really have a scope to see the progression on OCT in these patients. And in GCIPL, thickness change of more than 4 microns in macula is suggestive of a glaucoma. So, and it correlates very well with 10-2. So floor effect is at 45, and suppose now it's gone there. Now where do we go from here? So from here 10-2 continues, or 10-2 can go to macula, but we now come to OCT angiography. There's so many these things for which we find no reason. So this angiography, as on today, what is available is majorly qualitative. We don't really have quantitative, but this density correlates very well with the macular changes. Therefore, a day has to come when there will be a grid which will tell us that this is a loss of OCT, loss of vessels, and that loss of vessels will be very significant to tell us in very, very advanced patients. So now importance. Now glaucoma suspects and early glaucomas, very, very important, and OHD, all these are gray areas. So we can clarify these gray areas with this machine. Then for early detection, we can use RNFL, the very effective. Disc field not correlating in any kind of glaucomas, OCT is indicated. Sometimes it's really difficult to monitor the discs and RNFL because certain amount of media opacities like cataract and all are there. But we look at the OCT has got something like 810 to 10,040 wavelength. So it can go through better through the relatively translucent media. So it can give us good pictures, though it may not be as high quality as in the clear lens, but at least we'll have some data. Sometimes the patients are in huge denial and we really need to convince them that, look here, friend, you really have a problem. We can use it there. Then for progression and detection, I don't think there is any ambiguity. And sometimes when the disc view is not very good, we can again use OCT. Then we may not use. That means if the disc and field changes can be assessed very well and they're correlating very well, we don't really have a need. If glaucoma is very advanced beyond floor defect, I don't think we really need to do it. And just to impress patient doing is, I think, is criminal. So with that, a very good this thing. So take home will be OCT is a non-invasive reproducible documentation device. It's got powerful tool for detection as well as progression and disc field discrepancy uncooperative patients. So structures to structure correlation gives a huge amount of strength to any ophthalmologist to diagnose glaucoma, but it's not in isolation. It is in collaboration with these pictures, IOP, gonioscopy, and good old field. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadoria. It was an extensive talk to sum up everything, and take-home message was really good. Now I would have our keynote address by Dr. Nazli Zabardast. She is a clinician, scientist, and full-time member of glaucoma services at Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary. She specializes in the treatment of adult glaucoma and combined glaucoma and cataracts, with a particular interest in minimally invasive glaucoma surgery. She has received numerous awards and honors for her academic research accomplishments and has published in top ophthalmology journals. She has worked with researchers at Irvine Eye Institute in India to study angle closure glaucoma and blinding eye diseases. And now we will listen to her talk, Angle Closure Glaucoma.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Nazli Zabardast, Assistant Professor of Ophthalmology at Massachusetts Eye and Ear and Harvard Medical School. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk on angle closure glaucoma. I have no financial interests. Before we start discussing this disease, it's important to review standardized definitions of angle closure stages so that we're all on the same page. Stages of angle closure are most commonly defined based on the ISGEO classification guidelines, where primary angle closure suspects are individuals with more than 2 quadrants of iridotrabecular contact, but with no evidence of secondary effect of the disease. Whereas primary angle closure are individuals with more than 2 quadrants of contact, but with evidence of higher intraocular pressure or PAS formation. Those with primary angle closure glaucoma have evidence of glaucomatous optic neuropathy defined by dischanges, visual fields, and OCTs. And then there is this other thing called an acute angle closure crisis with pupillary block and very high IOP. Primary angle closure glaucoma is a major cause of blindness worldwide and a major public health problem. Though PACG is half as prevalent as primary open angle glaucoma, blindness from PACG is much more common, with nearly half of all glaucoma-related blindness from PACG. About 50% of this occurs in China and 25% in India, so it's a huge problem in Asia. There are even more people with PACS, about 10% of the adult population in Asian countries, and the estimated prevalence of PACS being 3 to 5 times that of PAC and PACG. We know that early detection is key to prevent progression and vision loss. In any form of glaucoma, generally, early detection is key to preserving vision. In angle closure, by performing an LPI, and more importantly, probably cataract extraction as early as possible, may prevent further worsening and may actually provide definitive treatment. We also know that eyes that have prophylactic LPI after an acute attack in the other eye do really well. The best evidence we have for early lens extraction is from the EAGLE study. This was a randomized controlled trial where individuals with PAC-PACG and high IOP were randomized to clear lens extraction versus laser iridotomy. Those eyes that underwent early lens extraction had better quality of life and IOP control. They were on fewer medications and had fewer glaucoma surgery. So how do we find all these people with PAC and PACG that we can treat? Well, the long accepted risk factor has been PACS. And to find individuals with PACS, we need a formal eye examination and gonioscopy. It's impractical to screen everyone because there's too many people. Remember, that's about 10% of the adult population. It might also be that PACS may not be the correct risk factor for PAC and PACG. The ZAP study showed that iridotomies in all these eyes may not be indicated and change this dogma. So we have this paradox. We have a high rate of angle closure related blindness, but infrequent progression from PACS to PAC-PACG. PACS as currently defined then may not actually be the true risk factor for the PACG group. So how do we identify eyes that are at high risk of future PAC and PACG? The short answer is that this is not currently known. We need better ways to find eyes that are at risk of future blindness. And one study I'm going to discuss a little bit more detail, the Indian Family Angle Closure Evaluation, or IFACE, was designed to partially answer this question. This was a pivotal study that was completed at Erivan Eye Hospital in collaboration with the Wilmer Eye Institute, and I had the privilege to be part of this. IFACE 1 was designed to answer the question of whether family history is a major risk factor for angle closure. It was conducted at the Erivan Eye Hospital in Pondicherry, and it recruited open-angle PACS and PAC-PACG probands and their siblings to look at the prevalence of angle closure in sibling pairs. Patients that visited the glaucoma clinic in the Erivan Eye Hospital in Pondicherry were recruited who were over the age of 30 that had siblings that were also over the age of 30 were invited to participate. Open angle controls were recruited from the general eye clinic. Those that were bilaterally pseudophakic or had prior glaucoma surgery or iridotomies or iridoplasty were excluded, as well as individuals that were having an acute angle closure attack. All subjects underwent a full eye examination in a masked manner, including A-scan, pachymetry, slit lamp examination, intraocular pressure measurement in a masked manner, as well as gonioscopy. The examining ophthalmologist also was masked to whether the subjects were proband or siblings. In iPhase 2, we aim to determine if severe stages of angle closure, defined as PAC or PACG, were more prevalent among siblings of PAC-PACG probands as compared to siblings of PACS probands. So we determined this odds ratio. It was very similar to iPhase 1, but because we needed more diseased eyes, we expanded this to Medarai, Coimbatore, and Tinelvelli, and only included individuals and their siblings with PACS, PAC, and PACG. So iPhase 1 found that siblings of angle closure subjects had more than 1 in 3 risk of prevalent angle closure and 14 times greater odds of having angle closure compared to open angle siblings. This was a pivotal study in establishing family history as a strong risk factor for angle closure glaucoma. In iPhase 2, interestingly, we found that the odds of advanced disease, as in elevated pressure, PAS, or glaucoma, was higher among siblings of patients that also had advanced disease themselves, suggesting that when resources are limited, we may want to focus our attention in screening for these individuals. The studies together showed strong heritability of the angle closure phenotype. PACS and PAC-PACG siblings groups both had higher prevalence of angle closure compared to controls as well as the general population. And while the PACS siblings had a prevalence of PAC-PACG comparable to the general South Indian populations, the siblings of individuals with PAC-PACG had 3 times the rate of PAC-PACG than the general population. So much higher prevalence of advanced disease in those that have a family history of advanced disease. These studies together suggest that there may be 2 different sets of genetic risk factors. One that predisposes to presence of angle closure anatomy and leads to higher odds of angle closure, but a different set of genetic risk factors that predisposes to intolerance of iridotrabecular contact or likelihood of progressing to PAC-PACG. Alternatively, it's possible that there are genetic risk factors for angle closure anatomy that occur earlier in those that have siblings with more severe forms of disease compared to those that have siblings with less severe forms of angle closure, such as PACS. To support the genetic nature of angle closure, we have actually recently found and published using the iPhase study high heritability of angle closure phenotypes. So, for example, there is high heritability of iris, anterior chamber, and lens parameters there among sibling pairs. Additionally, we found that lens thickness and lens vault are more heritable among concordant siblings, as in siblings that both have angle closure compared to siblings where one is open angle versus the other one is angle closure. And these 2 factors may be involved in pathogenesis of angle closure. Additionally, we found that siblings older than their probands and with shallower anterior chamber depth have a greater likelihood of angle closure and may need more careful disease monitoring. In fact, we know that angle closure glaucoma has a genetic basis, and though studies have been limited compared to primary open angle glaucoma, to date, multi-ethnic genome-wide association studies have identified 8 variants that are associated with this disease. The age of precision medicine is approaching, and in fact, we can use these known risk variants, though small, to risk stratify patients. In one study, for example, a simple weighted genetic risk score was associated significantly with severe forms of PACG compared to individuals that had a lower genetic risk score. With the advent of large-scale genomics and clinical data, we can leverage datasets such as the UK Biobank to refine genetic risk scores. Here we use the summary statistics from prior GWAS studies to generate a genome-wide polygenic risk score for primary angle closure glaucoma with relatively good performance. The area and the receiver operating curve characteristics of this this PRS was 0.65 and increased to 0.7 with the addition of age and sex. We can also see here that the prevalence of PACG increases with each decile of polygenic risk for the disease. So what's next? Well, we have effective treatments. We just need to find the right individuals to treat. How do we do this? We need to better define the phenotype. We need longitudinal studies and better imaging methods to understand anatomic predictors of progression to PAC-PACG. Essentially, we need to redefine the risk factor, which may or may not be PACS. We also need to uncover the genetics of angle closure. The current known genetic risk variants only explain 5% of genetic susceptibility to this disease, so there is a lot of room for improvement. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Take care.
So we will conclude this IC, and thank you all for my co-presenters and co-instructors for their excellent talks, and we would meet soon again. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.